Okay. All right. Good evening. This is Tuesday, May 26th, 2020, regularly scheduled Board of Education meeting. The board has been in closed session since 6 o'clock for items listed on the agenda. As I've done in the past few meetings, I'm going to do a full roll call so that the community is aware of who's on the call since we're virtual. So when I call your name, if you could just say here so that the community knows. All right, I'll start with the board.
Who's shuffling papers?
Margaret Harrell.
Here.
Karen Stupin.
Present.
Beth Hostler.
Here.
Courtney Troutman.
Present.
Jim Collins. Okay, not here yet. Chris Kaczynski is absent tonight. Dave Moyer.
Here.
Chris Melton, Assistant Superintendent for Finance.
Here.
Nikki Tamaru, Assistant Superintendent for Learning.
We don't, Nikki, Scott, Marianne, and Michael, the instructional people are not on the meeting tonight.
Okay, thank you for that. Mark Cohen, Assistant Superintendent of HR.
Here.
Bev Redmond, Executive Director of Communications.
Here.
Dave Smith, Executive Director of Tech.
Here.
Jenna Ernst, our Minute Keeper.
Here.
And then I know we have architects from White and Company. I think we have Leanne
Here.
and Harry.
Craig is here.
I'm here.
Okay.
Craig is the unknown architect.
Yeah, always.
I'm looking at Harry and then Todd Schmidt, facility.
Here.
All right. Did I forget anybody?
Jim joined, or I saw him join. Did he leave again?
Jim, you want to give a shout out?
Jim is here.
All right. Jim is here. Okay. If we could say the pledge. I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of the United
States of America.
And to the republic for which it stands,
one
nation,
under
God,
indivisible.
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Board members will be participating remotely in accord with Section 6 of Executive Order 5 issued on March 16th, 2020. As such, public comments can be submitted in writing prior to the meeting by filling out the form that was on the website. So there are 3 tonight, so I will just read them. The first one is from Terry Paulos and Armella. I can't read the last name. Okay. Canceling REACH appeals testing this spring denies 43 fifth grade students who worked very hard this year the opportunity to be measured and assessed for suitable placement. Illinois law requires accommodations of academically gifted students in the Accelerated Placement Act and requires schools to have in place systems to identify, advance, or accommodate gifted children. The law provides that accelerated placement is not limited to those identified as gifted and talented, but open to all children who demonstrate high ability and may benefit from accelerated placement. The law requires a fair and equitable decision-making process that involves multiple persons and includes parents. The law requires that recommendations from teachers and parents must be considered. The ability to administer standardized tests, which are so heavily relied upon for decision-making, is critical. Taking away those opportunities is not a solution, and according to law, these systems must be in place. Furthermore, parents who have expressed their concern are not being heard, and teachers who have made recommendations are not being considered in this decision. This is inequitable and does not support the mission of District 205 to accelerate the learning for all students. Yes, the circumstances are quite we are experiencing are unprecedented. However, it's imperative we adapt and create solutions to operate effectively moving forward. All right. Next, public comment from David Brown. It was disappointing to hear such harsh criticism of the York High School administrators at the last board meeting in regards to graduation. I honestly believe they were doing the best they could in a novel situation, given their lack of authority and flexibility. Next one is from Jane Conrad. It is disappointing that more discussion and debate wasn't given to the new grading policy that gives a minimum of a 50% for every assignment or test, whether it was completed or not. Normally, these kinds of pass everyone policies are only implemented in poor performing districts that need to boost their graduation and GPA numbers. It would be a shame if Elmhurst got that kind of reputation. That is all the public comment that was received. All right. Next item is the approval of board meeting minutes. So A, approval of April 28th, 2020 and May 12th, 2020 minutes. Are there any changes to be noted?
Kara, it's Karen.
Yes.
We need to clarify or correct our reorganization. I don't have the email in front of me, but you appointed Margaret as president to start the new reorganization. And then she asked for nominations for president, and Jim Collins nominated you. And then you were elected. So we just need to make sure that the minutes reflect that. And I know that Jenna has gotten an email from me correlating that, but I needed to make it public.
Okay. Thank you, Karen, for catching that. Any other, Jenna, have you been able to note that, or is that noted?
Yes, it's noted.
Okay. Any other?
Thank you, Jenna.
Anything else in those two sets of minutes? Okay, so with that noted change, those stand as presented. Item B is approval of May 12th, 2020 closed session meetings minutes. Those stand as presented. So now we'll move into the business section. We have the consent agenda. Would any board member like to pull an item off the consent agenda? Okay, hearing none, then I would ask for a motion for the consent agenda. As a reminder, you need to read all under H, it tells you to read all the parts of the motion.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, go ahead.
Kara, is that good?
Courtney?
I make a motion that the Board of Education approve the consent agenda, which includes A, personnel report, B, financial report, C, approval of network equipment and professional services for wide area network and internet upgrades, D, approval of amended costs for new middle school science resources, E, approval for nurses contract for 2021 school year, F, approval for funding from Foundation 205 to support emergency relief for students during the COVID-19 crisis, and G, approval for donation from Emerson.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, motion made by Courtney, a second by Beth. Jenna, you can call the vote, please.
Mrs. Troutman,
Yes?
Mrs. Hostler,
Yes.
Dr. Harrell,
Yes.
Mrs. Stupin,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Mrs. Gaforio.
Yes. 6 ayes, no nays, 1 absent, the motion passes. All right, next items are superintendent's agenda, action items. Item A is approval of resolution of the Board of Education directing the school treasurer to transfer funds from the operations and maintenance fund to the capital project fund. Dave?
So this happens regularly, and you can see that it's to fund our summer capital projects that's listed in the rationale. So Chris can elaborate further if necessary, but this is standard practice every year.
Right, do I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve the resolution of the board directing school treasurer to transfer funds from the Operations and Maintenance Fund to the Capital Project Fund.
I'll second.
Okay, motion by Margaret, second by Courtney. Discussion? Okay, hearing none, then Jenna, you can call the vote.
Dr. Harrell,
Yes.
Mrs. Troutman,
Yes.
Mrs. Stupen,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Mrs. Hostler,
Yes.
Mrs. Kaforia.
Yes. 6 ayes, no nays, 1 absent, motion passes. Item B, approval of First Amendment to the 2019 Comprehensive Intergovernmental Agreement between the City of Elmhurst and Elmhurst School District 205. Dave, could you give a little
Yes, I can. So due to the recent situation, which has compromised all of our public bodies, we have reached an agreement with the city to push back some of the timelines that were originally established in the IGA as it relates to the York and Jackson detention projects, and also the requirements to bring the Bryan maintenance lot up to code. So we will be cleaning out the maintenance lot as we had promised to do this summer, but we will not be paving the parking lot, which comes at a pretty significant price tag due to not only the project itself, but also the stormwater, and then requirements that go along with it. And then the timelines for the other projects were also pushed back to give people some flexibility in being able to appropriately plan under the new circumstances.
All right, if I could have a motion, then we can discuss.
I move that the Board of Education move to approve and to authorize the President and Secretary to sign and date the First Amendment to the 2019 Comprehensive Intergovernmental Agreement between the City of Elmhurst and Elmhurst School District 205, substantially in the form included in the board agenda packet.
I second.
Motion by Beth, second by Courtney. Are there any questions or discussion, clarity you need? Okay. Well, hearing none, then Jenna, you can call the vote.
Mrs. Hostler,
Yes.
Mrs. Troutman,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Mrs. Stupen,
Yes.
Dr. Harrell,
Yes.
Mrs. Kaforia.
Yes. 6 ayes, no nays, 1 absent, motion passes. All right, item C, approval of agreement between the Board of Education of Elmhurst Community Unit School District number 205 and the Elmhurst Paraprofessional and School-Related Personnel Council Local 571 IFTAF.
So this employee group ratified a tentative agreement last week, and we are recommending that you vote to approve this agreement tonight. And it is a 1-year deal. Typically, we have had 3-year contracts with our bargaining units that have rotated on off years. In this case, due to some of the financial uncertainties, we're looking at a 1-year agreement, and it is recommended for approval.
Okay. If I could have a motion, and then if there's any discussion or questions.
I'll make a motion that the Board of Education approve the agreement between the Board of Education of Elmhurst Community Unit to School District 205 and the Elmhurst Paraprofessional and School-Related Personnel Council, Local 571, IFT-AFT.
This is Margaret Harrell. I second.
Okay, motion made by Courtney, seconded by Margaret. Any questions or comments?
I would say just thank you to everyone involved with the TA and congratulations. Or maybe, I mean, as the vote, but I mean, you know, I think that it's, I'm very grateful to everybody working on it and the what they were able to come together with.
Anybody else? Okay, Jenna, you can call the vote.
Mrs. Troutman,
Yes.
Dr. Harrell,
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen,
Yes.
Mrs. Hostler,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Mrs. Gavoria.
Yes. 6 ayes, no nays, 1 absent. The motion passes. Thank you to all of those that worked on it. Really appreciate it. Okay, next item is the approval of staff salaries for 2020-2021 non-union.
So
Dave?
we have 3 bargaining units in the district, and then we have a variety of employees that are not in a bargaining unit. District office, support staff, administration, technology, and some other employees sprinkled across the district. And each year in May, we bring forward a recommendation that, with some exceptions, but generally speaking, is consistent with the CPI, which this year is 1.9%. And we bring this forward in May so that we can process contracts in June for the next fiscal year. We do have some employees that do not work 12-month contracts, so we try to bring this forward in May. You see in the recommendation that some of our food service employees are being recommended for 3.5%. That is to try to bring people into line with the new minimum wage laws over a period of time. That we started that process with that group last year. The various different groups that deviate from the 1.9% recommendation are part of the administrative compensation proposal that is updated from the original study that I did in spring of 2016. And the retirement agreements, the 3 people listed in the retirement agreements, those are already signed agreements with the Board of Education. Linda has 4 more years. Jim Flascota also has 4 more years. Jeff Gale will be entering the first of 6 years. So his amount is actually 5%. We have treated the administrators traditionally the same way we've treated the teachers with the retirement provisions. But Linda and Jim are 3. And then we have longevity. When I did the original study, we were coming off a fairly significant amount of administrative turnover, which was bothersome to many people. And so we tried to create some incentives to minimize turnover. And so we have some longevity bumps at 5 and 10 years, and we have some education incentives for people pursuing a leadership track for the superintendent's endorsement and completion of a doctorate. And so those would either be in the case of the longevity, that's 1% for 5 years above the CPI. The EDS degree, that's not being completed for those people officially until August. So that's a prorated amount above the 1.9%. And with the doctorate, Scott had some provisions built into the first year of his contract with anticipation of completion of his doctorate. So his his salary number isn't quite as clean as the others in terms of a straight percentage. But the other people completing their doctorate in December would have, instead of a 2% increase, they'd have a 1% increase above CPI for completing it mid-year. And then the other salary adjustments that you see on there, we had two tiers of elementary principal compensation with some other employees in each of those ranges. And we eliminated one of those ranges because with the construction project, we will be expanding Madison. We will be balancing enrollment across the district. So for example, Edison will no longer be as much of an outlier as compared to our other schools. And other school districts, when we did our updated salary study, do not have a provision like that, but we felt that it was no longer pertinent to our current situation moving forward. So we put everybody into the same bracket for that. And so some of the other affected people that are not administrators, well, at least there's one who's not a school principal, is also affected by that range changing. And then you see there's one employee on there where there was a mistake in her salary calculation, and we are correcting that. So that is those are the categories that deviate from the CPI recommendation. And I think that explains what you're being asked to approve.
Okay. All right. Do I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve, this is Beth, sorry. I move that the Board of Education approve the 2020-2021 salaries for all non-union employees as presented.
I will second. It's Courtney.
Okay, so motion by Beth, second by Courtney. Discussion or questions? I'm having a hard time seeing any, so
This is Jim.
okay. Can you talk a little louder or at least closer to your microphone?
Sure. Is this any better?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Yeah. I'd like to see if we can amend this motion. I have no problem approving tonight new wages for our hourly employees that are on this list. However, I would like to defer the approval. I'd like to defer the rest of the motion to our June meeting. For the same concerns that Courtney Troutman brought up 2 meetings ago about the approval of some displays for our students, because she was concerned about whether school would open in the fall and whether we need to be spending that money. We've had several board members express some concern about the budget in general. And in June, originally was going to be a finance meeting to take a look at the budget. Kara and I talked. I would recommend that be made a committee of the whole meeting to talk about the budget. And I feel it's only appropriate to extend the courtesy to me that I extended by deferring the motion on the educational displays to the June meeting, so that we can consider the budget as a whole, including pay raises for our highest paid employees. It seems to only make sense to look at everything we can at the same time. And that seems to be in June.
So can I just clarify, just make sure? So the committee, so there was a finance committee, was it last week, or I'm losing track of time?
It was last Tuesday. You are correct.
Okay, so last Tuesday, and there was discussion there about, digging into the budget in light of COVID and just Um, and I don't want to steal the thunder from the report later in the meeting, but just
Don't worry, you're welcome to.
that discussion took place. And I know there have been a lot of questions that have come up, as different agenda items. This one came up about the displays. And I think it would be wise if there was a committee of the whole where we only talk about finance, like the finance meeting, but it's committee of the whole around the budget so that everyone can engage in that and we can actually get our footing on, school finance is different than, maybe the business sector, different things. It's important to understand the nuances, and we might be able to have a good projection of even the next 6 to 12 months. By then, I think there's a feeling, my sense from the board, from people's comments, is they're feeling a little unsure, unsteady about where everything is, but everyone wants to make wise decisions. And I also think that it's important to clarify and that this isn't about anyone not doing a great job or not wanting to, these are the people that support our schools, they lead our schools. It's not about that. It's about just taking a pause and looking at where we are. So is that kind of recap, Jim?
Kara, I think that's a great summary. The one thing I would add to that is why the timing in June. The first installment of property taxes, which are 85% of our revenues, is due June 1st. So by the end of the first week in June, the vast majority of the first installment of our property tax revenue has come in the door. And that is, I think that will be very telling as to see what percentage of the first installment of our property tax revenue that we actually see.
Well, and Kara and Jim, the only thing that I would add is the most important piece, right, is we're about education. And we want to ensure that this board continues on with improving the delivery of our education for all of our students. And we need to have the conversation with that context, not just a financial piece. We're very sensitive and we have to continue, and especially now with COVID-19 and impacts, if not in the short term, in the long term. But it's about, even though we may have to do something, but we're always having to look at the finances, but that it be focused, laser focused on improving the educational experience and outcomes for all of our students.
So, and I want to make sure I hear from, everybody. And I do just want to, clarify, I think for myself personally, I really understand, I think having been around this district so long, I mean, both as a parent and watching and participating, it is our strong leaders that help us, improve the experience at our schools. And that's really an important piece. And sometimes it's hard to, we don't always think about that, and we think about our teachers, but leadership is really important too. So I want to make sure our people, yes, and I'm
just to clarify. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I am okay with that scenario, but I think it's important, like, if everybody kind of weighs in, if you want to, have that discussion at a committee of the whole, and we table this till the June 16th meeting.
So Kara, it's Courtney, if this is a good time.
Yep.
I guess for me, I find it difficult to compare the purchase of equipment to the supporting of the leaders of our district. And I think that's kind of apples and oranges in my mind. I think that the leaders and the administrators of our schools and our district are the ones that are defining and directing the experience that our children and every level of education are having, and they are the ones that are steering our curriculum. So I don't see that as the same as me not agreeing that we should buy monitors for technology. I also am concerned that if we do this kind of committee of the whole, line by line budget review, which I'm not opposed to, I think it's a great lesson in education for board members and for our community to see what our budget looks like line by line. But I am very concerned about distracting our district from the immense task that we're facing right now on how to get our kids back to school for the 2021 school year. I'm sorry if my dog is barking in the background. I apologize. I hear it. So I feel like we are a very fortunate district based on all the work that our prior boards have done that have left us in this very comfortable runway position, as the terminology I've learned. But I feel like distracting from getting our kids back into school with a curriculum and a safety plan that makes our families feel comfortable should be what we're focusing on, and not a line by line deep dive budget review of everything that we're spending. So I don't feel comfortable putting this on in June, because I think, and somebody I'm sure will correct me, I feel like the first committee meetings about what the new school year will look like is tomorrow. So, and June is next week. So I don't feel like I want our district and our administrators distracted from that most important objective in my mind.
So Kara, I just want to make sure that I'm clear. What I was saying, I think we're mixing the two. So I think we're mixing the conversation with the finance committee update with this issue, because it's not just the equipment. It's actually it was part of what the curriculum is going to do and what the leaders were going to do. So we have to be really educated and clear about it. That's all I'm saying. To me, they're two separate issues, because you're going to hear in June the functionality. It's not just equipment. It's what our leaders are trying to implement next. But that's June's meeting, which is different than the finance and ops update, which is different than this. So we really have to be careful that we're misunderstanding linkages. They're all separated. It's just our decision making that links them.
I actually, I want to clarify, if I'm understanding, Karen, you're saying they're all separate, and yet I'm hearing from board members, so correct me if I'm wrong, that a decision can't be made on some of these things unless they have gone deep into the budget.
So that this is the point, right? So because of the delayed last meeting or 2 meetings ago, it muddies the water is all I'm saying. We are making decisions on spending money, but we're not looking at it, and we're looking at it as just, how do I want to say it? It is part of the educational process. It is part of what we're providing educationally, and we're supposed to go even hybrid, let alone if we're in the classroom, in a way that we have started this process, 5 or 6 years ago, and we just took one next step 2 meetings ago, and with the thought process of the ability to delay that. And I understand it. We didn't know 2 meetings ago that we're going to be in the classroom, and people don't understand the linkage that it provides for remote. That's why I'm saying we have to be careful about what we're saying about what we're willing to spend money on, what we're willing to delay. And that's why I think it's important. If we don't know those things, then yeah, we do need to talk as a full board about what our priorities are, because this is a priority and it has been. And so what makes that stop and not other things? That's the concern that is brought up.
So this is Margaret, and I echo your words of wisdom, Care, where you talked about this is not a question on our leadership or our faith in our leadership and the excellent work that they have done and will continue to do as we move forward. I support Jim's suggestion on looking at this and in June and making a uniform decision. I don't know that this would change my mind at all on how I would vote, but I need to have that information to be, and the community needs to have that information so they can understand what we voted and how we voted. I do not believe at this point in time that this is the time for a deep dive in a budget line item by line item. However, the point that Jim made about will there be any impact to our revenue based off property tax in June? I do not expect that there will be, but I don't know that. I don't know that. I don't know that we know that. So I don't know if there's any harm to have this discussion in June. Now, this is a question. So that's my thought. This is a question to Dave. I know that most of these contracts are a yearly basis, and they receive the new contracts in June. If we vote on this in June, how, if at all, does that impact the ability to create these new contracts in a timely basis?
Well, I mean, you would just do what you have to do. I mean, some of the people who, nobody's particularly in the office right now with the same kind of, regularity that they used to be. So those types of things, you'd process them later. And you would just have to handle it then. I think there's more to the conversation than there's more to this decision than deciding about whether or not we process the contracts in 3 weeks or at the end of this week. Is the way I would answer that. And I do also want to, reinforce what I believe the commitment that was made at the Finance Committee meeting was that we would explain to you some of the measures that we're taking with this year's budget in terms of some cost containment strategies at the June Finance Committee meeting, and that we were not going to be prepared to provide a ton of thorough, detailed information at that time. And we have a meeting scheduled tomorrow, and we had a conversation today at Cabinet about making sure that we're prepared for that June Finance Committee meeting in that manner, which we thought was going to be on June 23rd, which is after the board meeting. So if there has to be a committee of the whole meeting in essentially a week or so, when you figure, June 1st is Monday, if we have to recalibrate, I guess it would be a couple weeks from, I don't know when it would be. We would have to revise our approach and get ready for that somehow.
can I add something, Kara?
Yeah.
Dave, I think we have the same view of what we talked about in the Finance Committee. We're not looking for a deep dive in June into the budget line by line, but we are looking for the administration's explanation of what the levers are. And the key piece of information here is property tax revenues. June 1st is the date the first installment of property taxes in DuPage County is due. So 1 week later, allowing for any late delivery of the mail, we'll know what that first installment looks like. And if I can remind the board that we are in as good a financial shape as we are because previous boards have been prudent, have taken a holistic approach to the budget, and sought as much information as possible when making a decision. By waiting 1 week, we can have far more information than we have today. My suggestion, I'm not looking to, I expect what we're going to find is that the vast majority of property, the first installment of property tax revenues actually comes in the door. And we don't have to engage in a discussion of reducing those proposed raises. That is the scenario that I hope turns out. But by waiting 1 week, it can be for sure instead of hope. So what I'd like to do is amend the motion on the table to include increases for our food service employees and remove all other salary increases and defer that until the June meeting.
Jim, there is a June 15th tax collection though. I just want to make sure you understand. We get one June 1st and one June 15th.
So
we won't know all the June collections until after June 15th.
So Chris, generally, so you say it's two collections. Is it two different due dates on people's property tax bill, or it's two disbursements from the county?
Two disbursements from the county. Last year, June 3rd, we received 32 million, and then June 14th, we got 26 million 8. So there's still a big installment that's going to come in from the county June 15th.
So when do you find out, Chris?
June 15th.
Okay.
And you can't find out before?
No.
But our meeting's the 16th, right?
Yes.
So why don't we have our committee of the whole meeting on the 15th?
I'm confused as to why we would need to move it up, Jim.
Well, if we did it that late, we wouldn't have any option to change. I mean, the 16th agenda would have already been locked down, so to speak. I mean, you know. Hang on. Chris, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, if the information Jim is looking for on June tax collections, we won't know until June 15th. So having the meeting the week before, we're only going to have the June 1st is a big portion, but you're still not knowing where we're at for June taxes.
Jim?
That's why we had it June 23rd.
I understand. So then I would defer. I guess then I'd have to request to defer this decision until June 23rd or later, sometime past that date. I'd like to know what the first installment of property tax revenues looks like. If it's down dramatically, or maybe the administration can explain how they would compensate for a dramatic decrease in property tax revenues this year.
Well,
I mean, we've the last few minutes we've spent, or the last few meetings, we've spent tens of millions of dollars.
well, I think that there are a lot of paths we could take. And I tried to suggest at the Finance Committee meeting that if we knew what type of target the board was looking for a budget number, that we would be able to bring recommendations forward to meet that expectation.
The number I would propose
take depends entirely on what type of situation we're actually in, but the majority of the steps that we would take, because the majority of the money is in personnel, and the deadlines for notifications for employees are in March, we would have to find a lot of money for the following year's budget, and then we would have to try to meet whatever expectation the board has this year. But I think that it's going to be. I mean, there are things that we can do, certainly, but as I said last time, I think it's not a good idea to start making public statements about theoretical types of things related to the budget until we can show a plan that has a rationale. That gets very emotional for the community, obviously.
So Kara, I have something. It's Karen.
Go ahead.
Okay. So another thought that I just had is if this board can agree to continue without taking a knee-jerk reaction, continue to make decisions that move the educational experience forward, improving the delivery of education forward until we have the information, I mean, that solves it too. It's just hard when we pull one thing and not others. It's very confusing for everyone. And especially when we're talking about, we finally got on track with priorities for our leadership, direction. And when we do the delays and when we do the no's after we have been planning for a couple of years, that it impacts our leaders. It impacts all of our people. And so that's what concerns me is the thinking and us as a board making sure that we are still focused on what it requires comprehensively to move the district forward. When, like Dave said, the largest ticket item is our people. And therefore, what we try to do is say, how can we move the whole district forward with the smaller piece of the pie that then leverages and helps our people, leadership, classroom, et cetera, move it forward. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay.
Can I just comment about that?
Yep.
This is Beth Hassler. So Karen, I think that for me, the technology piece was different than this piece, only in that what I thought we were asking at the last meeting, or the meeting where we talked about the displays, was because the information came in before we were in this COVID situation. And I think what we were asking was for more information about how those displays and the technology that goes along with them could benefit us in varying educational environments. So was it something that could only be used if students are in school in that classroom, or is there another piece, maybe the software, the technology might be used to benefit us, perhaps being used between two classrooms, or if there were things that could also benefit students and staff in remote learning as well. I think that the reason in my mind that we delayed that decision a little was because there was some more information based on what the fall and what next year is going to look like and how that technology would benefit students and staff moving forward. And then we would, as Jim said, have more information to make a more educated decision on that piece of spending. For me, this is different because I think that I feel strongly that strong leadership and consistent leadership in our schools benefits our students and our staff and our families in any educational environment, whether they're going to be guiding us through a new the new way that our students are going to be in school, or they're going to be guiding us through remote learning, or a combination of both. I don't think that we can argue that that is going to be beneficial for all of our stakeholders, no matter what that educational environment is going to look like. And I hear very clearly, Jim, what you're saying about wanting to know that piece of the of information before we make that decision. But my understanding is that those payments would just be delayed slightly with the help that the government gave on those tax payments. Is that correct?
Beth, you're
Yes.
asking me to speculate. No one knows. I'm trying to make a decision based upon as full of information as I can. And I can't
just thought it was a
speculate.
June payment or a September payment, that the
No.
payment could be delayed for those who need it.
Beth,
Yeah.
we're in uncharted territory. In the Great Depression, unemployment peaked at 25% of the population. For the segment of the population in the United States today that makes $40,000 a year or less, the unemployment rate is 40%. So we have no history to base speculation on here. All I'm asking to do is wait until we have full information.
So I just want to interject that, the technology is not the only thing that's part of this conversation, nor does it need to be. Although it certainly is something that we've agreed we should consider if that's the appropriate decision to make right now. But we've talked about pushing back furniture purchases. That's $400,000. We have deferred the Bryan project. That was originally supposed to be $1.8 million. You're talking about identifying 40 of the 1,000 employees at a total cost of about $200,000.
And this is Courtney, and thank you for that, because I do appreciate the fact that I want our community to know that we're aware of the constraints and challenges that we're facing right now, and we're not making purchases or plans that are not necessary. But I do feel, and I've said it before and I'll consistently say it, that our investment in our people is an investment in our kids and our community. And I don't feel that, based on the amazing work, and kudos to former boards that have left us in this very generous and successful position, that we should start making decisions to cut commitments to our personnel. That's something I feel very strongly about. The people are what makes our experience, our children's experiences and our community's experience, and the curriculum experience. And so I appreciate the the attention to other projects, and I appreciate what we're doing to be judicious about our spending. But for me, I am not comfortable with not supporting the people that make up the heart of our district and our community.
No,
Kara,
I don't think anyone's suggesting that we not support them.
I don't either, right?
Thank you.
No, I'm not saying that you guys are supporting. I'm not saying, I'm sorry. Let me misstate. For me, I don't think that given the position that we're in, and I'm sorry if I implied that I thought you guys were doing that. That is not what I meant at all. So let me just say that. I'm just saying that I don't think any information that comes in June is going to change the opinion I have about supporting the leaders and the people that make our district function and that control the experience of the curriculum and for our families. So I'm sorry if I spoke that implied that you guys thought that. This is just how I feel, that no information. And like I said, based on what 4 of us that are on this board and other members of this board have done in the past, have left us in this very fortunate position that I just don't feel like we have to make that decision to start not investing in our people yet, or making cuts yet. So for me, my vote would be to vote yes on this now, or it'll be vote yes on this in June. I think, I don't know, that's all for me.
Well, but 2 meetings ago, we did make the decision to delay and cut, you know what I mean, potential. And I guess that's the only clarification that I want us to make sure, right? So I firmly support our leaders and our community, which has said the focus has to be about education and improving it. And so it's not equipment, it's functionality, and it's what our leaders were planning to implement the start of the school year, which they have to plan this summer. And I just want to make sure that this board is willing to be willing and approve the funds for them to do the job that we set forth.
So, yeah, this is Margaret. And let me go back. Let me ask, to be fair, I am not making a connection in the decision that we made 2 weeks ago about, 2 meetings ago, which would have been a month ago, on the delivery, how we were going to deliver our education. I'm not making that connection. And I'm not making that connection in what we're doing right now. But what I do want to look at is if we were to delay this decision until a June meeting, what I want to understand is what's the earliest time we could have that discussion, and with the information that we're asking to have, what's the earliest time we could have that information and have that meeting? So that's what I would like to understand. I think Chris mentioned that the information wouldn't come in until June 15th, and the Finance Committee meeting, which would be changed to a committee meeting of the whole, was scheduled June 23rd. The school board meeting currently scheduled, we have a school board meeting currently scheduled June 16th. Here's a question to the board. For all of those who feel strong that we should wait on that information, are we willing to have a second school board meeting in June after we get this information that we can put on the plan right now, so we can have the second meeting and vote on it in June?
Margaret, I don't understand why we can't have that committee of the whole meeting on the 15th, our regularly scheduled board meeting on the 16th. What would be wrong with that? Then we'll have full information. We'll put this on the agenda for the 16th.
Okay, so is that So that's a good question, Jim. Thank you. Is that something, will we have the information that we need? Will the administration be able to gather the information that they need to have a committee of the whole meeting on June 15th?
We'll do whatever the board asks. I'm thinking that based on Chris's excellent presentation at the Finance Committee meeting, I'm skeptical that there'll be a lot of new information, but we can do whatever the board asks.
I am sorry I missed Chris's excellent presentation. So I am not aware of what was discussed. So I hear from Dave that it is possible to have the committee of the whole meeting perhaps on June 15th and to have this topic on our agenda for June 16th. That's what I hear is possible.
I don't want to speak completely on behalf of Chris because I don't know what it would take for him to be prepared to do justice to the information you're requesting when he receives it that day. As far as the rest of that we need to work on, we'll work backwards from the 15th if that's the decision.
I can be ready.
All right, so Chris can perform another excellent presentation.
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay, so it sounds like we would have the committee of the whole meeting on June 15th, and it would go over the tax, property tax payout that would have been received on June 1st and June 15th, and would discuss what would be the second component of that, just to make sure that we're all on the same page for that meeting.
Well, we expected to be able to demonstrate at the Finance Committee meeting the measures that we were taking to contain costs, which was going to include everything from reductions in travel and consultants to delaying all but essential maintenance. And I think that, you know, there are several other ideas that we have that would be cost effective, that would be more in year two of the process, just because of deadlines and timelines needed to make decisions. But we have several other things that we're considering as well. But the things that we would bring to you in June would just be an assurance that there's a fiscally conservative approach to next year's budget that you can feel comfortable with, knowing that the various different sentiments that were expressed by the board over the last couple months about being cost conscious are being taken into account in the planning.
Okay, any objections to that? Those two things at the committee of the whole?
Kara, I think that sounds great and will give us more information. Just to reiterate, so that make sure we're clear, this is not what was discussed at the finance meeting. More of a deep dive exercise that would be later on. This is just kind of a general overview of how you're being conscientious in decision making moving forward at this time. Correct, Dave?
Yes.
Jim, or okay. I just wanted to make sure that we were talking about two different reports, if you will.
I think what Dave just described is absolutely consistent with what we talked about in the last Finance Committee meeting in terms of timing of consideration of what to do with the budget.
I think it gives us a measured approach.
Yeah. Okay.
These decisions.
Perfect.
And then this will then be tabled to the June 16th agenda. correct?
Yep.
So I think I need a motion for someone for this agenda item to be tabled.
Kara,
Yeah.
can I suggest that we just amend the motion that's on the table?
Okay.
And we amend the motion to include increases for food service employees and remove all other salary increases. And then you can just put all those other salary increases on the June agenda. And
Yeah. And
Margaret, were you saying something? If you were, we didn't hear you.
so this is my question. I am just wondering if we table the entire motion, what impact? I very much appreciate the attention that Jim is providing our food service employees. But again, I want to reiterate what, if any, harm will be done for that group of employees if
Well,
we.
the harm is the perception that the tech people who've been busting their tail for the last several months and have been the people that have been expected to come into work and be more at risk will have, as well as perhaps some other employees.
Okay.
That's the risk.
Thank you, Dave. So then, your suggestion may be then that we table the entire proposal until that June 16th meeting.
My suggestion is that we can handle it however the board wants to handle it.
I'm just trying to make it as easy as possible. So you want to include the food service employees and those tech employees in this amended motion? I'm fine with that.
Yeah, and right, Jim. My only thought is that I don't want to start doing carve outs. Again, my thought on here is we don't want to risk not appearing not to be appreciative for any group of individuals. What we are suggesting right now is that we table this, and I would suggest that we table this entire decision until that June discussion. Now, if I can just follow up, my question is, will there be any harm done to any employee with a delay in making this approval?
No.
Okay.
Any financial benefit that anybody would receive would begin effective July 1.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so I think out of just simplicity, it's wise to just table the whole I can't talk. The whole motion. So there needs to be a motion to amend or a motion to table the motion on the floor.
So this is Margaret, and I move that we table the current motion on the board regarding non-union salaries until our June 16th meeting.
Second.
All right, I'll second that.
Okay. All right. So any other discussion on that? Okay, then Jenna, you can call the vote.
Dr. Harrell,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen,
Yes.
Mrs. Troutman,
No.
Mrs. Hostler,
Yes.
Mrs. Gavorio.
Yes. 5 yeses, 1 no, 1 absent. The motion to table, the motion on the floor is, it passes. All right, and then that will be on the June 16th agenda. All right, approval of resolution ascertaining prevailing wages.
This is an annual thing that's required by law.
Okay, could
So
I have,
you do this every year.
could I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve the prevailing wage resolution as presented. This is Beth Hassler.
Margaret Harrell seconds.
Okay, any questions or discussion? Okay, Jenny, you can call the vote.
Mrs. Hostler,
Yes.
Dr. Harrell,
Yes.
Mrs. Troutman,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Present.
Mrs. Stufen,
Yes.
Mrs. Gavorio.
Yes. 5 ayes, no nays, 1 present, 1 absent. The motion passes. Next is superintendent's communication. We have the Lincoln and Field exterior concepts from White and Company.
All right, so I'll turn it over. These were presented at the Finance Committee meeting. We wanted to get the initial first blush at the exterior of the 2 new buildings out to or made available rather at a public meeting. And they're in the process of constructing some more precise estimates to make sure that we stay within budget. So I'll just put the caveat out there that there could be some revisions to these designs over time as the project evolves, and you saw that at Edison. So that's kind of a normal part of the process. But these are the initial ideas that we're looking at. Go ahead, Craig.
All right, I don't see the presentation on the screen.
Oh, you don't?
We do.
I think we can see it, Craig.
Spectacular.
That's not the right presentation, I don't think, is it?
It is, but we're going to skip the first, this is Leanne, we're going to skip the first 3 slides and get right to the Lincoln and Field.
Oh, okay. Is that why you don't
presentation.
recognize it, Craig, maybe?
No, I got it now. It appeared.
Oh,
There you
didn't
go.
see that first. Okay, all right.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen of the board and Dr. Moore, thanks for having us. Always good to be in front of you and sharing the latest concepts that we've been working on for Lincoln and Field. And really, as Dr. Moore pointed out, it is strictly related to the exterior. So since the last time we got together, if you remember, we shared with you the floor plans. And from that point onward, we've been doing a little refinement for sure with the plans, nothing major, but really taking a deeper dive into what the building could look like on the outside. And again, as Dr. Moyer had started the conversation, this is just a moment in time. It is an update of where we stand as a design team. And that design team includes ICI, certainly everybody from White, as well as the district administration and leadership, and all the people that have been giving us input from the school. So it's a really good moment to just kind of catch our breath, if you will, as ICI is looking at our drawings and our design concepts. They'll be coming back to us shortly to see how they align with the budget, and we'll be making adjustments as we move forward or as needed based on how those numbers come back. But in the meantime, let us show you where we're at. So let's start off with Lincoln. There we go. And before we get to the exterior, just to remind everybody of where we left all of you with the floor plan and sort of the site improvements that we are contemplating. So this is Lincoln, really kind of surrounded by Hillside, Villette, Fairfield, and Montrose. On all four sides, we have the building more or less in the center of the site, with the play fields on the north end and parking for about 80 cars on the south end, with some generous space for some drop-off lanes and so forth. Key to point out over here is the main entrance off of Fairfield, so it'll remain very close to where it is right now on the site. Again, the difference being over here, a little bit more grander entrance, and certainly the inclusion of car traffic onto the site, so that we could alleviate some of the traffic issues. And I say just some of the traffic issues that happen on a daily basis before and after school. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sharing with you a couple of our initial thoughts, a couple of renderings that show initial thoughts. The first one, if you could, Dave, is going to be the main entrance. And in this particular instance, you'll note that kind of the inclusion of flat roofs as opposed to some of the gable roofs, and that's just part of the iterative process as we go through and we're designing and we're talking to people and getting feedback. We've gone down a direction that might seem a little bit more appropriate based on the feedback that we got, and hopefully, certainly the budget numbers that that ICI is preparing. But again, really. A canopy with some signage as a gesture and where to enter, and then a combination of punched openings and some curtain wall or glass walls to articulate some of the classrooms that are along this side of the building. You'll notice in the back on the left side over there, that is the gymnasium that we had spoken about during our planning concepts. That's our tornado shelter. And then on the other side, flanking the main entrance, that glass box that you see at the end, that is really a protrusion, or really it's the spine of the school that includes the cafeteria, the library, and some community functions. Let's go to the next slide. And then this would be really at the corner of Hillside and Montrose, looking back towards the school. And this really depicts our current thinking in terms of how the classroom neighborhoods would be articulated. And again, picking up on the same sort of materials and the expression that we had at the front of the building, but really finding a new way of implementing that for the classroom neighborhoods. And with all the same kind of masonry, the glass walls are with punched openings on it, and then the glass walls up on the second floor. Again, reflecting back to the neighborhood that surrounds it, and giving it quite a nice contemporary feel. Moving on over to Field. Again, similar to what we did over at Lincoln, just sharing with you here the latest site plan. In this particular instance, Field really is only bounded by North Avenue on the north side, but separated with a sound wall, as you remember, and then the Emroy on the west side. The building itself, in this particular instance, is sited on the north end of the property, with the fields, ball fields, play fields, as well as the parking and the drop-off lanes then on the south end. And we're doing this primarily to take into consideration how the water drains from the site, and really to help us financially be responsible in terms of the cut and fill of the land that's going to be required to place the school on the site. So, little different footprint than Lincoln. We're talking about kind of fitting puzzle pieces together over here, and then that'll be ultimately expressed on the outside of the building. So let's go to the first image. And this would be looking at Emroy moving northward towards North Avenue. And very similar to what we talked about over at Lincoln, with the signage and sort of a nice glass entrance, the flags and flagpole and so forth. But in this particular instance, it's the dining and slash library volume and classrooms that are really off to its side. And that's what you see in those glass walls there, with a canopy that overshoots a waiting plaza for kids as they're waiting to get picked up from their parents. And then in the back on the left side is just a sneak peek of what's to come in the next rendering, which is the classroom neighborhoods. So let's go there, Dave. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice all of a sudden. So this is standing at the corner of Emroy and North Avenue, looking back towards the building, and over the pedestrian walkway that goes underneath North Avenue. But really, this shows you the kind of articulation that we're contemplating for field, similar to what we're proposing over at Lincoln, but not quite the same, just with a little bit of difference there, maybe a little bit more restrained, but punched openings on the lower level, and then some glass up above with alternating mullions on color that would reflect from that we would actually draw inspiration from some of the residences that are around the school there. So pretty straightforward. And actually, the thought here with the amount of glass and the way we've organized the building is because of where it is located in Elmhurst proper. This is more or less the gateway and sort of the beacon to the district, if not the community itself. And so a pretty nice view in terms of welcoming visitors as well as your parents and kids to the Elmhurst district.
Okay.
That's what we have for field. We've been asked, do we want to spend a little time talking about Emerson at all? Dave? David Moyer? Kara? Would you like us to talk about Emerson?
I guess I thought that this was going to be more about the new construction,
Yeah.
but since we're moving along with the some of the Emerson concepts, we can show those if you think that they're far enough along to bring them into a public meeting.
No, well, we're in our infant stages with that, so I would recommend that we defer that to later board meeting.
Okay, all right. Then why don't we bring that forward when we feel that we have a little bit better detail to put to it.
Very good.
Thank you.
That's all we have for tonight.
Are you ready for like questions or comments?
Please bring them on.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to go first this time. So, first of all, thanks. These are, it's taken so long to get here. So it's kind of amazing. I still, in looking at this again, I still feel like this view, there's just, I don't know if it's the fence. I don't know if it's looking at the underpass thing. I don't know. Just something with the fence and the way that is maybe isn't quite what the finished product will look like. I don't know. I'm just saying I'm not a big fan of how that looks. So.
It is something that we are still wrestling with, to be perfectly frank with you. And as we said before, it's kind of an iterative process. So we've gotten some feedback from you as well as your peers. And we are back at the ranch as we speak, looking at our options, and we'll be prepared in the very near future to come back with some resolution and some response to the comments that we've heard to date.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Appreciate all your work. I'll let somebody else.
Well, Kara, it's Karen. Since that picture's up there and you talked about it, Craig, can you just clarify for us, and especially if the community is, going to view this and be part of the board meeting, help us understand clearly that what is in place for protection around North Avenue and all that is the city, everybody else's property, will remain the same. We're not changing any of that, correct?
We are. There is a sound wall that runs along North Avenue, and it's kind of hard to see in this particular view because of the the angle and the sun and so forth, but that will all remain in place. We will not be touching that one smidge. On top of that, you heard the previous comments about the fence that we're proposing, and again, we're looking at our options with regards to that. So there's going to be that bit of security as well on top of what is currently in place. So the next layer and the last layer is what we're doing with landscaping as well. That comes into the later stages. So we'll be looking at those in a little bit more detail, and then embellishing this particular view with all of those updates and other additional amenities as we move forward.
Okay, so the safety that's in place right now remains the safety, and then we add additional.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. So this is Margaret, and I would like to ask a little bit about that fence, and maybe you could explain a little bit more, like the intent of the intent of that fence, and maybe describe it a little, please.
So if I could just jump in there, Craig, if you could,
Yes.
You could elaborate, but I'd like to say something initially before you get into it. When we consult with the principals on these types of designs, they have to schedule their building, and they have various different things that they need to take into account. And sometimes with the younger kids like that, it's nice to have a play area adjacent to their rooms where they can just go right out and play. It makes it more efficient to get them in and out. It makes it easier to schedule when you have multiple different play areas. And so in another building that we built in a different district, something similar to that was incorporated. And typically, Craig, I think if you recount some of the principals' conversations that you've had with them about their designs, I'm assuming, although I wasn't in on all those meetings, that there were statements like that were made about that, to that effect.
Absolutely, Dave. And really, at one point when we were looking at the floor plans and making adjustments there, one of the comments came back to us asking us to consider thinking about kindergarten more towards the front of the building, where the kids will be dropped off a little bit more efficiently and shuffled into the building. And so what you're looking at right now is a view of the first grade and the kindergarten wing, I guess, if you will. And as Dr. Moyer mentioned, one of the current thinking here is to have a play area for the kids right outside the classrooms, again, to cut down the amount of travel that they're going to amount of building they need to traverse to get to the outside. In doing that, providing an enclosure on the outside is something that we were requested to provide. And as I had previously said, we're still looking at our options with that, but right now we're thinking about something that has a little bit more sturdiness to it. Whether it turns out to be a masonry wall or masonry piers with some metal pickets, that might be another iteration that we're going to be looking at. So we have options available, and we need to just kind of ferret that out a little bit, certainly with the design team, in conjunction with ICI, and of course with the principal and her trusted advisors.
Okay, thank you. So if I can understand that the intent of that fence was, and I think I heard from Dave and Craig that might be a play area for the younger students, kindergarten and first grade, where they could be easily go out and have a containment, have an area where they could play safely, and then go back quickly in. That's the idea, the intent of that?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Hey, Kara, it's Beth. I just wanted to, Craig, one thing about the area that Kara was speaking to, one thing I love about these designs is the brightness and the lightness of them. we're looking back at the other view of Field or at Lincoln with the lighter gray and the wood tones, maybe on this backside, that's what's a little bit different on this side. So I don't know if it's just something that came to mind in looking at the different views. I'm sure that's something you guys are looking at as well as far as materials.
Funny you should say that, because we just had a conversation today sort of about the surround that you see in the windows over here. It's white as opposed to Lincoln, which is a little darker. And we are, we're not at a point where we have to definitively say it's one or the other. So it's going to be something that we're going to experiment with a little bit and come back to you with some revised renderings for sure. And that includes not just this school, but Lincoln as well.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I think, and just to kind of chime in back about that fence, I think part of it could be the picture, and it doesn't look like it's big enough to protect kids. But that could just be my perception from the picture.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, and to that point, I'm sorry, this is Courtney. I really I appreciate Karen bringing up the safety measures and the noise wall and stuff that, the board, we've seen these several times before, and I often forget that this is the first time many community members have seen it, and there's been a lot of thought into all that. So I appreciate Karen bringing that point up to expound on the fact that all those safety measures that are in place are not going anywhere. We're making them even better. So, and that's important to not just this board, but obviously the whole community.
Any questions or comments about Lincoln? Dave, you want to go back a few slides?
Yeah, I like this is Margaret Harrell, and I'm just commenting that I like this revised picture minus the gabled roofs. Yeah.
Craig, this is Karen. I would reiterate my comment on this meeting that you and Leanne heard the first time I looked, or the second time I looked at it, is I would highly suggest that we make use of the space. I know that it's nice to have the neighborhood, I think you call them pods, but we have a lot of construction, and we have seen enrollment increases significantly, and other districts not, and we just continue to see more people being attracted to Elmhurst and our education system. So I would close that off. You can do interior pods, but for the exterior, I would make that a flat continuous wall, so that we can have the flexibility of interior use. We know that our current buildings were at capacity, and they were designed for the education system that was in place then. And we know the significant increases of staff, students, needs, and I would like us to anticipate it, and I'm sure it's probably less expensive to close that off. So there's a lot of functionality and a lot of good reasons for us to do that on behalf of the community.
But Craig, do I recall that there's already kind of expansion room in these designs for exactly that scenario?
We have built into both schools 2 additional classrooms for student growth. And it's built into the square footage and the budget that we have right now. So certainly something we'll take a look at, but we do have budget limitations as well that we have to respect.
I'd like to build on Craig's answer to that, because there are some other things that are part of this discussion that actually were part of the discussion all the way back in the referendum phase. And so we did take the feedback into account that people wanted to have a little bit of cushion. So that's what Craig referred to. But the sites are so tight that they're already less than ideal in terms of the recommendations for the size of the lot versus the size of the school that you're putting on it. And so if we expand the footprint of the building, we're not just talking about extra classrooms. We're talking about more stormwater detention potentially. We're talking about if we go beyond a 4-section school, we're talking about a principal having to schedule specials, cafeteria, gym. So the playground areas, we're talking about needing a lot of additional space beyond just what would end up being put into place with additional classrooms. And so we really wanted to keep Lincoln at a 600 student school. And right now it's at about 550. So we didn't want to go beyond a 4-section school. And what the board said at the time was that we would build the buildings and we would build in some a cushion at one of the sites that actually had some land, that being Edison, so that as the if there were any future considerations that needed to be taken into account with space, there would be options for future boards to decide if it was boundaries, if it was moving programs or whatever, that there would be flexibility built into the overall plan. So that's another piece of it too, that the extra 2 classrooms at Lincoln and Field is not the only flexibility that we've considered in terms of the overall project.
Yeah, I wanted to be clear. It's not just classrooms, it's the functionality. I mean, you know, look at 1975, right? We had teachers and principals and 1 psychologist, and now we have hundreds of additional. So it doesn't necessarily mean new classrooms. It's do we have the capacity without having to build schools or tear them down and rebuild for additional needs that are unforeseen? That's what I'm saying. And I think that we would be prudent to do that on behalf of the taxpayer money that we're investing here. That's my concern. Or my point, and therefore I would like to know what the cost differential would be, because I'm not asking for anything besides closing those 2 little openings. That's all. I would like us to consider it and show to the community. We have to do our responsibility.
Okay.
Greg, how wide are those openings between those 3 pods?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
How wide is that gap between the 2 fingers in each of those 3 pods?
If you go
I'd
back
have
to the
get-
site plan,
I'm guessing maybe 30 feet.
Oh, okay, so it's significant.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and I think that, I guess, is the point that goes back to Dave's point about stormwater detention, right? It's a trickle down effect. Like we
Yeah.
fill that in with construction, and that then impacts what we need to do for other projects to address that. Is that correct, Craig? I'm assuming.
Yeah. Well, it's of course it's never just black and white, right? So as Dr. Moore pointed out, if we're actually increasing capacity beyond the 600, planning for more than 600 kids, that means you need more gym space, you need more dining space, and we would have to go through a program study to look at that. But we could do that.
But Craig,
And we're-
it's not additional students, it's just different needs. Like
Well,
we have
I
to
think that-
reconfigure other buildings. I guess I really, this is important that we do our homework and at least mitigate, like show that we've done this on behalf of the
Sure.
community.
The architects have met with all of our service providers, and those were taken into account with the plans for the Edison expansion and the 2 new buildings in terms of needs for space. And there is internal flexibility built into the designs of all of these buildings, but the student services people have been consulted, as have the special ed people and all of the administrators. So,
And I appreciate that, Dave. I really do. But we didn't know in 1975. And you don't, I mean, education, and you would be the first to say how it's changed. And therefore, we've had to invest money to retrofit existing buildings. So I'm saying that this is the design. We know that from the past. We need to prove to the community what the differential is. So that
For
we
For
Go
more
ahead.
classrooms or for more like,
what's the difference of what it is today, closing that off? What's the cost comparison? I mean, because I have to do stormwater anyway. It can't be that much more for those two sections. That's all I'm saying. And and all we have to do is just share it with the community. So we've done our work. Is all I'm trying to say, versus ignore it.
There's a lot of design features that would need to be changed about the natural light of the coming into the classrooms and other things like that. Craig, how ICI's already been doing a lot of costing so that we can get these bid packages prepared, correct?
Yeah, we're working on the estimates now, Dave, for that. And it's not as simple as just closing off that opening. It does change a lot of the interior structure, would change exiting plans and so forth. I would imagine you'd probably end up with another staircase on the outside here to get people out. So
Correct.
it'd be a pretty significant cost increase to do that. I can pretty safely say it's not in the cards. We don't have that money in the budget to do that.
okay, anybody else?
So the additional cost would be changing the plans from original design.
If
Just to be clear, or not?
Well,
No.
well,
there's a significant additional cost even to put that structure in there, a significant cost.
it's about 4,000 to 5,000 extra square feet that we would be adding to close that in. So that would be significant dollars over budget.
Margaret, are you?
Yeah, and I was just thinking if it and thank you, I appreciate that that number 4,000 to 5,000 additional square feet. And can we just talk about approximately? And this is not talking about stormwater detention or anything. What's our approximate cost per square foot to build? Do we know that?
But we don't know that yet because we haven't developed the ST estimate.
Okay,
But
but it's. I'm sorry. So it is a I think that's helpful for me to know that's it's. Jim mentioned it was 30 feet, and I'm thinking 30 feet by it looks like 2-3 stories, and you put it into perspective of about 4,000 to 5,000 feet additional building that we're talking about.
Which is 8 to 10% of the overall floor plan at this point. It's a very significant cost increase.
Okay, Tim. Okay, great. Thank you for that information. I think that's helpful. I think that's what that was the question that we were looking at, trying to understand what that amount was. And now we have a better understanding of what that additional amount would cost.
Very good.
Anybody else? Silence. Okay.
I think they look great. Thank you so much for all your work, and excited to see the next step.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. And, I guess my only question kind of wrapping this up is what is the next step? Just so the community knows and.
Sure.
Yeah.
So there's a couple things. There's the we're looking at making refinements and updates to the outside, and that'll be done in conjunction with the comments that we're hearing here, as well as the budget numbers that we get from ICI. We're also going to start then taking a deeper dive into the interiors. and seeing how that works out. And if you remember when we did Edison, we shared with you a lot of perspectives on the inside so you can get a flavor, not just the colors, but the materials. And then we'll go through a very similar process that we are going through right now on the outside. We'll do that on the inside. Then we kind of burrow in and we start doing some more detailed drawings for bidding and construction. But in conjunction with that, there is also going to be some input that we'll get from the community members as well. And Leanne, you might want to fill in the blanks on that one.
Well, of course, we're waiting for the cost estimate for sure, first week of June. And then there's usually an alignment process as we look a little deeper into all these items to make sure that we stay within budget. And then at that time, we've been talking to the leadership about how we would involve the community in a larger manner and working through that with all of our COVID situations and whether that would be virtual or live type of meeting. So we just don't know the specifics yet.
But as you go out to the community, particularly at Lincoln, I guess, are you, and this might be a question for Bev, if you're still on here, Bev, I can't see you.
I'm here.
Is there kind of are you thinking of some way to kind of reach the neighbors that are right around looking at that school? And also, obviously, at Field, there's some right around there, too.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there would be a couple of different ways to do that, either by direct mail to a particular neighborhood. That could be a possibility. Also, assuming and when COVID situations lift a little bit, there might be some on foot possibilities to reach our neighbors as well.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you for that.
Can I ask just a question? What if you go out to the surrounding neighborhood and they say, we don't want to live across the street from this? What do you do then? What if they want something more traditional?
We take people's feedback into account. We did that at Edison, and we try to consider all of those factors and come up with the best design that we can. We try to explain that we're building a school for 100 years, so we're taking into account everybody's opinion and also trying to do our best to make sure that the investment that the community made will pay the best dividends possible for the kids. I think that White has been very receptive to feedback at every stage in the process. So I don't see why that would change. Ultimately, we have to try to be good neighbors, but I think that, the district and the board also, has to take into account a lot of different things when final decisions are made. So I don't know what the people that live in the houses immediately around that school will say, but I got to believe that they will look at this and see this as a significant upgrade compared to the current building that we have. And I guess that's what we'll find out when we'll work through it when we get the feedback.
It's why we do the community feedback loop, right?
And I will just say, having been part of the process back from the ground level, what's Brian going to look like? And I will say admittedly, it was my first interaction with having to do something like this, but the White's ability to hear what not just the principals, but the teachers and the community were saying during those meetings. And then the next time I would come back and you heard everything. And so I have 100% confidence that if the community is giving you feedback that says this doesn't work for our neighborhood, you hear them. And it has just been such an amazing experience working with you. And it's very uplifting and positive to deal with a company of your size and magnitude. You make it feel personal every single time I have a conversation with you. So I applaud all the efforts and the time and commitment you're giving to our community for all of these projects.
Thank you.
So just clarification, we're going out to every single one of the neighbors who are adjacent to this property, correct? Bev,
That's up
I
to
guess
you.
that's you, or?
I can take that.
That's what we did at Edison. We did a
Yeah, we
community
did.
tour, and every person in that area was contacted.
Mhm.
And so how do we contact them? To
there-
make sure that every single person around there, yeah.
There are a couple of different ways that
you.
we have done this in the past. One, particularly, this is a little more costly, but a COVID-friendly option that we could invest in a direct mail piece that goes directly to that neighborhood. That's a possibility. And also assuming and believing that we will at some point be able to be in the neighborhoods physically, there is also a possibility of actually doing some on-foot canvassing, as well as soliciting email addresses to make sure that we can maintain contact with them, as well as social media opportunities for individuals to follow along as the process develops. And all of that can be tucked into direct mail, email, all kinds of different ways you can employ.
I would just suggest that we be more sensitive to this location because it truly is the most embedded school in our neighborhood.
Without a question. Right.
Thank you
Mhm.
very much.
Okay. Thank you all. If there's nothing else, we'll move on then. Look
Thank
forward
you.
to seeing you again.
Thank you.
So long, everyone.
Bye. All right. Next is Freedom of Information Act requests. Dave?
Yeah, so there were two requesting specific invoices. One was granted, one was denied. One requesting specific bid information, which was granted. One requesting specific contract information, which was granted.
Okay. Then board communications, the finance committee report. I know it's on video, but Jim?
It is on video, and 6 of the 7 board members were present, at least for part of the time. So let me just quickly go through the topics. We heard from White and ICI about their current plans and work progress at Edison, Bryan, Fisher, Jackson, Jefferson, Sandburg, and Emerson. And I should say this meeting went on for 3 hours, so I think I can sum it up in 2.5. And then they also gave us updates, pretty much the same update you saw on Lincoln and Field tonight. And then they also talked about the Emerson construction and what's going on at York. And they did present some information on sustainability, different cost comparisons. And that is the one thing that we were going to delve in a little deeper with them within a finance committee meeting in June, is for Lincoln and Field, what would, is priced out as closely as they can, these different sustainability levels cost, and what are the grants available for those sustainability levels that could help bridge any cost differential between what we budgeted and what the actual cost of those higher sustainability levels actually are. I would like to pursue, and before we get too much further, I would like to pursue those sustainability cost comparisons. And then item C was, we got a quick update from Elizabeth Hennessy on the bond market. Pretty much the conclusion was that I think a few months ago we talked about if interest rates rose 60 basis points, That was the break even for, issuing debt now rather than later. Elizabeth pointed out because costs go down every month that we wait, because there is less capitalized interest in the bond issue, that gap is now down to 30 basis points. She reviewed that, bond market volatility is going down, interest rates are going down, but we are hampered because we are in the state of Illinois and we are hampered by the state of Illinois' fiscal problems. And the conclusion that we came to, and maybe the board needs to discuss this, is the right thing to do right now is just wait and see if we are ready to go, but if any dramatic improvement in the bond market were to happen, Elizabeth would come back recommending that we go. But right now, her recommendation is that we wait. Does the board concur with that conclusion?
Well, I would say yes. I mean, if Elizabeth says to wait, I concur. That's me personally.
Yeah, this is Courtney. I completely agree.
I agree, Jim. Beth here.
Okay. And then next, Chris Welton talked about the financial implications of COVID-19. And I believe the consensus that we came to was that Chris and the administration would come back in June with an update on what can be done to the budget or what they're considering this year. We heard much about that in our previous discussion at this meeting, which are things like deferring furniture purchases and things like that. And then later in the year, sometime in the fall, it would be an opportunity for the administration to come to us, and we're just, by that point, we would know whether budget cuts were necessary or not. The recommendation that Chris Welton had, and I concur with, is that very likely this year's budget is going to come in as the revenues will come in as projected. The budget years that are at risk are a couple of years out, because you can build a very likely scenario that the inflation number for this year is very low, and that would be reflected 2 years out in our ability to levy taxes. In addition to that, it's also very likely that new construction would come down considerably, as the current economic situation has created great uncertainty, and that there would be fewer new houses built. I think you can build a case for that. And you can also build a case for that there would be less investment by businesses building bigger buildings. And that will impact our new growth numbers. So the administration has the opportunity to free think how they could lower the cost of education in Elmhurst in a multiple year time frame. And I personally, because it is just literally wargaming and not real, until revenues start to drop, then it becomes real. But the planning process for that is highly valuable. And I think it'll be a highly valuable exercise and an opportunity for the administration to share their vision with us. Then item E, Chris went through the April financial reports. Everything is in line. Obviously, there are a few, bus contracts, et cetera, that are lower than expected. But all in all, the budget is generally in line. And as I said, the meeting lasted. That's all I have. If anybody has any questions or wants any more clarification, I'm happy to do that.
I don't know if I just want to ask a question that maybe you talked about and I missed because I was just listening, but either you or Chris Welton, but when is it realistic? And Chris, I say this understanding there's a lot of, we need to, like, the first priority is making sure we're ready for fall, but also simultaneously, like a projection on, kind of a solid projection on what might be ahead financially. Like, is that after both tax payments like June and September?
So the state came out with their budget. I'm sure you read that in the news. Flat state funding for the school district for school districts in Illinois for next year. So we will continue to get the same amount in evidence-based funding, which is $6.5 million next year. The mandated categoricals will be exactly the same next year. Property taxes should be very similar. So I don't expect property taxes to be impacted a whole lot by in this year or next year. As Jim pointed out, my concern is not the coming levy in December, but the following levy, December of 21, which is the property taxes in calendar year 22, which we consider for fiscal year 23. That is where we're really going to have to try to keep our expenditure increases down. So that's the year that we are all talking about. So it's really, we're talking 2 years out. So it does give us some time. FY23 is the concern. The taxes coming in calendar year 22. So June and September of 22, that's the very small increase because CPI this year is crazy low. And then, as Jim said, the new construction number that we think will be low as well. So that is the concern.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Anything else? Jim, if you're saying anything, you're on mute. Just FYI.
Oh, no, I'm on mute because I'm not saying anything.
Okay, I just wasn't sure. Okay, all right. So, any other board communications, anything? Okay, then we have a few meetings coming up. So it's not on the agenda on here, but there is a policy committee meeting on June 4th and Courtney or Margaret or Beth, can you help me with the time?
I believe we set that time for 6 p.m., but don't hold me to it. I will double check. Margaret, does that sound right for you?
Yes, I recall 6 p.m.
Okay, so policy committee meeting, June 4th at 6 p.m. And then we have our regularly scheduled board meeting on Tuesday, June 16th, 2020 at 7 o'clock. And it is my hope that we can be in person or at least partially in person as restrictions loosen and we're allowed groups of 10. That maybe like we were in March where the board is at least present, but that will be communicated out as the restrictions, if they become loosened. And then we have Tuesday, July 14th, 2020 Board of Education meeting at 7 o'clock. And then I guess from tonight, is it okay to go ahead and say, Jim, that there's a finance committee on June 15th?
I thought we were going to have that a committee of the whole meeting.
Yes. Committee of the whole on June 15th.
Yeah, which we shouldn't call a finance and operations meeting.
So, but we will have a committee of the whole on June 15th.
Yes.
Okay. All right, I think, we may have to call, I think it's realistic to think there may have to be a special meeting or two over the summer due to, as things progress with school starting and, just, we may not, but just keeping that out there. So other than that, I have nothing else, and it is 9:15, and I will call the meeting adjourned.